You might care to note that there is a common, quite persistent, reoccurring thread to the news tonight. In lieu of leading a normal life, one man said to himself, "I'll go on a cruise." The most foolish statement an ordinary man can make is for him to say that he knows himself. This also constitutes the supreme case of what he calls lying, which is better described as the distracting of oneself, which is man's continuing attempt to fool and deceive himself. One man pondered, "I know where I want to go. The question is how to fuel the conveyance." Part 2. For a man to truly know himself, he'd have to know why he does the things he does. And ordinary men do not realize that all they do is totally dictated by life. Thus they go on distracting themselves, claiming to know who they are and why they do what they do. Perhaps you should try and get it straight in this fashion. There is one thing that runs the body, one thing that runs the mind, and something else that runs the emotions, but they're all run by life, and their distinction unseen by the more conscious. Blood. Yet another way that the enlightened could be described would be to say that they are people who can give their own self a transfusion. If, for a moment, we were to call a man's normal mental state one of distracted consciousness, as opposed to the one the few have forever sought, then let us expound and describe this distracted state as one wherein a man is always trying to look away from the core of himself, that is, of his potential individual consciousness. His thoughts are continually looking away, and quite often frantically so, in a never-ending effort apparently intended to keep one from looking at, that is, being aware of, something, in caps and quotation marks, much closer to home, that is, within himself. And what could be going on here? There is certainly, in most people, not anything so despicable or terrifying as to be the basis for their continual looking away from themselves. So what can it be? What is it that men do not want to see? Or is it not really a matter of there being something in them that they do not want to see, but rather a matter that the mental eyes are naturally constructed in such a way as to make looking away the norm? Distracted consciousness is man's indigenous condition, and any who do not realize and understand this are not themselves conscious. At each and every an instant moment, you are either in the automatic flow of distracted mental awareness and activity, or you are, by your own efforts and yours alone, in a state that is in direct opposition to such a condition. The scoring of the game struggle for liberation is simple: all or nothing. The prince of one people announced, "I come to overthrow the king, not to bring peace, but renewed passion and excitement." It takes a special people to welcome such a message. If it sounds strange to hear it said that ordinary men would be incapacitated if they knew the secret, the truth about life, consider something milder and a little this side of that. They would be incapacitated if they were simply aware of the fact that they have no idea why they act, think, and feel as they do. In some ways, it's no problem being as you are, as long as you don't know how you are. At the ordinary level, though unbeknownst to itself, a mind that wants its problems solved wants to die. We won't even get into the same area regarding emotions today, That's right, chimes in life, one thing at a time. Hey, okay, just for that, we will get into how this relates to emotions. Oh, grown life. I stuck my big foot in it again. And if you don't know whether stuff like this makes you want to laugh or cry, then perhaps the time is ripe to delve into this emotional fog bank. Oh, grown zone life. Boy, I've really done it this time. Oh. You can never alter your state or see anything new as long as you are in a state of distraction and thus fooling yourself. And you are fooling yourself at every given moment as you take what you normally do, think, and feel to be reflections of your own will and desire. If you live in a dream, all you ever see are dreams. It could not be simpler or more difficult to escape from. Coffee. If they but knew, the few, would find it more conducive to awakening in the morning if they could get the caffeine in an area in them that the throat does not reach. One way to move closer to the area of potential real consciousness in yourself is to try to think clearly. And by that I mean to continually pull your mental activity out of its usual state of dispersed, chaotic distraction, which generally has some subjective emotional base, and force your attention into a controlled state of considering, studying, and exploring something, not excluding whatever was already subjectively churning in your thoughts, but in a clear and objective manner. At first it seems extremely difficult, but this is more self-deception, for it takes no special talent or training to shift the mind from thinking in an emotionally charged subjective manner to one otherwise. For there are no requirements physically or psychologically that the mind must think about certain things as opposed to other things, like how the lungs must breathe only one particular gaseous combination. And certainly no requirements that thinking itself must be based on one specific attitude or approach instead of another. Where the difficulty is sensed is in the fact that how and what one normally and naturally thinks takes no effort or attending to. It just happens. It flows, rambles, talks to you, curses, whines, cries, conspires, then immediately appears to have forgotten what it just did 10 seconds ago and begins to run the same course back over again, then again, and again. All of it just happens as naturally and effortless as breathing, while to do otherwise requires effort and a constant attention to thought so as to release you from that ordinary mental state of uncontrolled distraction. For a while, one man's private personal slogan became, anything to stop that bullet train. A father told a son, there is no problem in being a Siamese twin as long as you are both. No, let me correct that. There is no problem in being part of such an arrangement as long as one specific one of you is always aware of what you are both doing. To distract yourself is to deceive yourself, and to deceive yourself is to immobilize yourself. Question: can the body be happy? Can the mind be? How about emotions? Was that a dumb question or what? Or was it a trick to see if you would think that and reveal your own dumbness? To be of ordinary distracted consciousness is to wear out long before you actually die. The ordinary are impressed with those they label genius because they resemble someone actually focused. And yet another man steps forward to say that the most meaningful words he ever heard uttered came from his father also, in the form of his most common reply when questioned about why he had acted in a certain way, the response being, I don't know why. Entertainment, paid distraction, talk, free. Perhaps it can be of assistance put this way. A mind undistracted cannot participate in fooling you. Seeing himself as a tripartite kingdom, one man presented this challenge to himself. If there is no true without false, and there is no pain without pleasure, then what else is there with no blank without blank? And more than that, why should it be so? If you let the mind stay distracted and thus subject to self-deception, an entire world of emotional chaos can exist beneath it and apparently, totally unknown to you. What a beautiful word, apparently. Muse life as it daydreamed of man. If you are already in the gradual process of dying, it's really hard to make any sense of being alive. A man asked, if you could be yourself without unwittingly trying to fool yourself and others regarding who you are, would you then truly be yourself? Be simply what you are. Are the questions getting better, or is it my wishful thinking? Just because you don't yet see it this way doesn't mean it's not so. But the achieving of a new state of more stable and controlled awareness is a throwing of a bunch of unruly relatives out of your house. There is a simmering swamp in the basement that, left unattended to, will poison the air and upper floors. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. It's easier. No, let's rephrase that. There is more energy available to pull yourself out of distraction during times of crises and stress. A man asked, is it possible to say anything without at least partially engaging in an attempt to deceive someone, yourself included? Way too good to answer. Many an ordinary man's personal, though unrealized motto is that gradual drowning is not such a bad thing to happen to you, as long as you try not to pay any attention to it. Yeah, okay, but come on. It doesn't require any special attitude or effort to stay in a state of distraction. I mean, do we really need stories like that to remind us? I don't know for sure, sir. Do we? Breathing. Out of control emotions are strangling, especially to consciousness. Escape. Distracted thought is the attempt to get away from something. But what? The way by which another man would jog his attention back to his primary goal and the exertion required to run there toward, he put in the words, it's too crowded in here. A photographer reflected, there is nothing that will bring a blurry picture into clear focus like a good calamity. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Blurry pictures, distorted consciousness. Hint, hint. Nudge, nudge. The fuel to drive on. When you are born, everyone's tank is filled, which is obviously enough. But whoa, not so for the few. Physics, the origins of time, the distracted mind. Another way to keep from looking at it is to attack other people's behavior. One man's prayer seemed to be, let me be able to focus attention, control thinking, clear the mind, and stabilize consciousness, and above all, have the passion to do it. Yet another useful bit of info pertinent to that certain exploration. As long as you're looking at the Nile, there is no source of the Nile, just the Nile, with all of its many visible tributaries awaiting to give you grief. There is a certain area within the inner kingdom of man wherein those with that certain hunger, were they aware of the benefits and were they able to do so, would pray for bad weather each and every day. Nourishment. Never feed the enemy. Anyone not useful to you. Peace. All becomes calm just before death. One man privately named the train he was trying to ride Cobra Feet. Clarity. Distracted thought is distorted thought. One way to keep from feeling is to keep on a thinking. And while it does only seem to work, that's good enough for most. And way too bad for the few. Fairness. Distracted thought is prejudicial thought. One man's personal reminder to himself of his aim and needed effort was the sentence, "I can't breathe in here." Ask yourself, how can one distracted man lead other distracted men anywhere? Not possible. Now ask yourself, how can one man's distracted mind lead him anywhere? Likewise, impossible. More about the matter we mentioned. Useful efforts produce energy. Meaningless ones consume it. Evasion, fraud, and deceit. Distracted thought is the ultimate example of the runaround. If man was a bit further evolved along his present course, he would now begin the realization that what he has always referred to as mental and emotional problems can only exist in the presence of distracted consciousness, which I've noted is his current normal condition, which therefore keeps him from realizing it. One man's self-treatment was, always count to 3. One of the unthought-of problems regarding the transcendental quest is that you can never clearly see a destination while looking with a distracted mind. One guy's governing principle was, count to 3 and then forget about it. One man one day mused, is the reason it's so easy for thoughts to be distracted is to compensate for how difficult it is for this to happen with emotions? Yeah. I told you to forget about it, he reminds us. The one price that most people cannot pay for an increase in their consciousness is the giving up of their normal state of mental distraction and all of the comfortable self-deception that goes along with it. What ordinary men call thinking is simply the dispersion of thought. Clothing. Wear something looser. But it must be something looser of your own choice. Selection. Never give them a choice. What it is to be really distracted. Near the turn of the century, a certain man left his home in London and went off to seek his fame, fortune, and place in the public world. He had many early adventures and saw extraordinary sights. He married and raised a family while still enjoying the pleasures of mortal existence. But throughout it all, he never lost a yearning for his original homeland. But it was only 2 years after his death that he managed to return to England. Now, my friends, this is true distraction. If you heard the story correctly. It's, like an allegory. And finally, no allegory here, to internally resist the natural flow of life is perhaps a man's gravest form of self-deceit. There is a method I could describe to add to the abundance of those publicly known, having to do with what I was mentioning last time, that activities such as this, no matter what it's been called, no matter when it was, has an ultimate aim, usually called the enlightenment, the awakening, the liberation of the mind. And even without knowing it, it strikes people when they read any description of it, those born to this, those being the only ones that ever survive it. As soon as they hear about it, hear any or read any reasonable description, even 2,000-3,000 years removed from its source, it strikes them, yeah. anyone born to this who persists never loses sight of that fact. And it's not necessarily a pleasant sensation all the time, because oftentimes a person at certain moments has a feeling such as, if I may speak for them, as a common example, feelings like, well, goddamn, I've been involved with this blank number of years, and I'm still more or less who I was. I'm still as stupid as I was, and obviously as ugly, but I'm as stupid. I'm not sure I understand. The only thing I understand more than I did for sure is I realize that nobody else understands anything. Yeah. So there is no loss of an interest, a desire for the experience itself, which I do not care to, as always, to go into, other than to say that I can assure you that it is singular, it is worthy of the most grandiose, otherworldly, flamboyant descriptions anyone's ever attempted. But I have also gone far enough to assure you that unless you become the exception, being in that state continually is not what this is about. I don't mean by plan. Up until you, if you prove to be the exception, up until now, it has not been the case that those who reach such a state forever stay there. So between your first visit there, or between here and your 10th visit there, is always a matter of, well, what'll I do while I'm not there? Then you're left with the numerous so-called transcendental, metaphysical, mystical, even religious in some sense, many disciplines, methods, schools, approaches, and they all, above the simplistic level, above the most basic level of people involved with activities involving solely the body, such as fasting or some sort of physical activity of trying to strike a pose and stay in it until you petrify. Well, if it is not simply on a physical basis, which most fundamentalist religion, which is most of the religion in the world, is based upon, appeals to and activities only involving the body. If it is anywhere above that, then all of the methods known direct their attention primarily. Direct their attention, it would appear, on the outset, toward the mind. Now, they are those that apparently try and deal with man's emotions, but they're simply an offshoot of the physical ones, such as people attempting to do charitable work, people who go out and live with terminally ill people. Those are oftentimes considered saints, and or at least extremely charitable and compassionate routine humans. But that is still on a very physical basis. So you're left with the methods that have any pragmatic potential to an individual. They are always originally aimed at something to do with the mind, the thought processes. The most common being meditation in its many forms. Even if you're not sitting in a unmoving position, if it is a kind of peripatetic meditation, such as the attempt to continually pray, the attempt to continually repeat the name of Allah, or whatever it is, you are dealing, as far as the mind can see in the beginning, you are dealing directly. The efforts are aimed directly at the mind. And many of the older, well-known disciplines do not even speak of anything beyond that. They just say that is where the work is, and if the mind gets clear and you're a lucky son of a gun, enlightenment may fall upon you. But in some way you have got to clear the mind, you have got to calm the mind, you have got to bring the thought processes under some sort of control, you've got to be able to oversee your attention, something amongst all of that. Since it will not do you any harm, I will fulfill my threat and add, that's pretty cheesy because I've done it before anyway, but some of you don't know it. I was going to add yet another sort of describable method. And I think I'll call it the float method. I repeat one more time, we're not talking about an extraordinary state of consciousness. All this does is require attention and effort. All this does is require everything that I've just described from all the other publicly known attempted disciplines of bringing attention under control, reeling in thought, calming the mind, all of that. The float method, and for those of you who have been around or this here, it is sort of a variation. I used to refer to it as considering something, to be able to remember something without thinking about it. And that seemed to have such a clarifying and astounding effect on people's minds that, one, I abandoned it, and two, I think now maybe I'll try to make more sense out of it for you. Could have been my use of words. It's to be conscious of something without being conscious of it in the ordinary way. But it's conscious specifically aimed toward one's own internal thought processes, not to be conscious of something like I'm conscious of the stool here, but I'm conscious of it and yet not conscious of it in the ordinary sense. Now that, even for me, that's pretty tenuous. So what I was referring to was to be conscious of something like a question you had, something you'd considered about life, like what is evil, or whatever struck you one day. Why do I feel like I'm mistreated? Whatever it was, is to consider it, that is to be conscious of it, that yeah, I have those kind of feelings and they turn into thoughts. That sort of thing crosses my mind, and to be conscious of it without being conscious of it in the ordinary sense. But I changed it around to say that I call that at one time considering something, to be able to remember it. For you to remember it, because it's already running through your mind, such as you feel like that you are unduly mistreated emotionally by other people. And so you remember that, but without thinking about it. And as I said, buoyed by my great success with that one, well, super buoyed by the fact that there is no such thing as success. Here's the float method. I'll try it again. Since you're not going to start out, and by start out can mean a day, a year, 10 years, you're not going to start out and in some way stop thought, clear the mind, control consciousness. All of that, well, at least other people said this, so I'm not putting life's foot in it. Those sorts of things are more aptly spoken of as effects of the state of so-called liberation, enlightenment, etc. But you err in even thinking that there are disciplines, methods, whether they seem to be metaphysical or out in the more mundane marketplace. There's always been somebody comes up with an idea of some sort of mental exercises, something that apparently has no metaphysical or religious patina to it at all, and they present it as it would simply be good for people to be able to have more control over their mind. And this is off the beaten path, but I guess many of you are aware that such things exist. And they give, either directly or indirectly, the indication, whoever comes up with it and concocts this system and says they've had great experience with it and it's improved their sex life and they make more money and they lost weight and their memory improved. They don't have to write down the pizza delivery service number repeatedly, weekend after weekend. But anyway, the inference always being, and some forms of meditation are always presented either directly or indirectly. The tacit message very often being that the proper doing of this over a reasonable length of time will bring about a cessation of thought. They do not normally put it that way, and I don't believe it's any conspiracy, and it's just people who have sort of stumbled along, and at least they're aware of the fact, which many people are. But they're aware of the fact that their mind drones on and on thoughts, and it just strikes them as best they can do. It's like billions of cars going past their house every day. But every 2 months, every year, it really strikes them that one of those cars that they happen to pick out, they think, that looks awfully familiar, and if I'm not mistaken, in some way annoys me. And if they really get good, if they get to where they happen to notice one car out of a billion, 2 or 3 times a year, they really start to feel, that thing's beginning to annoy me. So then when they hear an idea that there is some way to, again, they don't normally put it as to stop thought, but in some way control it to such a degree that this sort of uncontrollable activity can, in fact, come under my control, or will of its own volition, through my effort, will diminish to such a point to be agreeably salubrious. I don't know how it could be. Never mind. Let's don't start that stuff. At any rate, I was going to point out that is an error. If you think otherwise, if you're involved with something, then press on. I don't mean to discourage you, but that does not happen. There is no way to directly go from the normal state of man, whereas what from one view is seen as uncontrollable thought processes, they are as natural as breathing. And no one thinks that you're breathing just because it's out of control, just because it's incessant, it's repetitive, your heartbeat. No one thinks of it that way. It is simply the heartbeat, the respiration of the brain. That is all that men ever find disagreeable. No one ever says, no sane person ever says, do you hear that? And they go, that damn thing's driving me crazy. Kaboom, 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 kaboom. Day and friggin' night. Kaboom, kaboom. Certainly not. But they do it with this. Now, ordinary sane people do not find this disagreeable enough that it seems to adversely affect their life, or that they even attempt to do anything about it. For conversely, should they find it that disagreeable and try to do something about it, that would remove them from the ranks of the ordinary. It simply would. Ordinary people, as they should, and as you could if you hadn't gotten tangled in this, which is not my fault. See life about it. Ordinary people go right along with it, and about the only time all of you are ordinary enough and sane enough that you know that generally any displeasure you have with the rambling, chaotic, uncontrollable nature and repetitive nature of thought, the only displeasure that a person ordinarily has is very spasmodic. Very spasmodic. In fact, people will do all that's possible, which is easy to do, to keep it from happening, which is what most forms of entertainment amount to, with no pejorative intent meant. But a person, if they're sitting around and they feel like kaboom, 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 that my thoughts are driving me nuts, well, they do. They'll turn on TV. They'll decide I'll go to a movie, or they'll pick up a magazine or a book. And it appears to be a cure. And you would not find one sane person on this planet that understands that. You'd be lucky to find maybe one in 2 or 3 million that, if I had them and tried to explain it to them, would even grasp it for a second. That being that their distraction, they're turning on a movie, picking up, and I don't mean just a cheap magazine. They could pick up a cheap romance magazine, or they could pick up the dialogues of Plato. And they do not realize that they have simply replaced one form of distraction, that is, kaboom, kaboom, and blah, 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 blah. God, it's driving me crazy. What it amounts to is, well, I'll let somebody else drive me crazy, and they turn on TV. And there's no attack on TV. Life knows what it's doing internally. But you're doing the same thing, rather than feeling like, well, my own thoughts is going on and driving me nuts. No one analyzes, as you know, in this manner. And you may call up a friend. I'm not just blaming it on entertainment. You may just decide to go out window shopping. Just go down the street and buy something so you can speak to somebody. And it's all the same thing. There is no difference in it. So it is mistaken to think that any sort of method is for the direct purpose or has the direct potential or promise of stopping thoughts and clearing the mind. But what men do not realize, and that some of these less metaphysical areas of so-called mind strengthening activities that I was referring to, they get about as close to what I was going to describe as a method, and I'm not inferring that the people involved understand anything, but it's like this. They're about the only ones that even come close, and it's only a man every generation or so stumbles up with some idea of like, hey, off of my own, and it's usually somebody that with no credentials, just very similar to the true transcendental figures throughout history, but just it's on a very minor level. But I was about to point out to you that at least they come up with the idea periodically, somebody does, they go, it just struck me. They can't formulate it this clearly, but what it amounts to, they say it strikes me that since the mind just runs on and on and on, after years of studying and working on this, I discovered a great secret. I can't turn it off, but rather than just let it run on and on and on and on, I found out that the mind really doesn't care if it thinks over here about something, or if you just let it run on and do whatever it wants to. All you got to do is stop it. It's like some sort of wild horse and begins running out of control, and it annoys you, and you finally find out the thing, you cannot stop it running. It continues to go. But you can stop it from wherever it was going, and it will stay in place, as it were. It'll just stand there in place and go. Or you can hold up a book to it, or you can talk to it. You can tell it, stay there for a second. Or you can say it, stay there. And the damn thing will stay there and not move, as long as you're looking at it. Of course, that's always the trick. That for years, my whole life, people feel like my mind was about to drive me crazy, just went on and on and on and on. And then I learned this trick. I found out all I had to do was say, would you stop a minute? And it'll stop. It doesn't quit running, but it's exactly. The simile is not misplaced. It's like a horse that you've stopped running and it's staying right there going. It won't stop running. You can't stop its little feet. But once you stop its actual forward motion, or wherever it was going, it is a great relief. I'll put it that way. It's a great surprise. It's a great relief. And if you're wired up the right way, usually the first time won't do it. But after a dozen or more times, sometime, it's like the first time you discovered it, it turns into a tremendous discovery. I mean, you already knew it, but it's a tremendous discovery to find out I can stop that thing from running. I can't stop its feet from moving. But I can stop it from dragging me along, from it actually going somewhere. I can make it stand right here beside me. It still runs in place. And I can do that. It won't complain. It will stay there. It's like it doesn't care what it's doing as long as it's running. And it'll stay right there. And I mean, it will stay right there as long as I look at it. But, oh my God, it's off again. All right. I was about to give you something, and if I don't run out of time, I was going to try and tie it to passion, which was the common thread running, or the sub-common thread in tonight's news, having to do with the passion needed to deal with the distraction of the mind. And after all the terms that's been used throughout history that man is asleep, man is in a state of intellectual imprisonment, that man lives in the dark, that man lives in a dream, and taken above, of course, the common, childish, fundamentalist physical level, that 9% of the world would still take it, you do understand that those who originated such terms, assuming that they knew what they were talking about, but the origins of the terms, the proper operational origins of the terms of being asleep, living in the dark, living in a dream, etc., does not refer to the body. It's higher up the nervous system. It's not that man is walking around physically in a dream. You know that's not true. Well, if it is, it's a dream that is quite workable. It is a dream state that does him physically no harm whatsoever, generally. It's only when a man is busily tied up thinking great thoughts or suffering the great pains of abuse from his fellow man that he is moaning and turns around and bumps in, gives himself a black eye. It's only then, those minor instances wherein living in a state of dream, distraction, living in the dark is of any detriment. But as anyone who knows anything now about man knows, living in that state, it's no problem. You can go jump in the car and drive home bumper to bumper, side to side, 90 miles an hour, all the way down the LA freeway, 90 miles an hour for 2 or 3 hours, daydreaming, whistling, lighting cigarettes, rolling up and down the window, looking here and there. You and everybody else, not just you. That doesn't matter. The float I was going to describe would be to take something. You can pick out something that you've always been interested in, some idea, Or just take whatever's flowing through your mind then. It takes a bit of dexterity, because like the horse, as soon as you look at it, it quits running. And you think, which way was it going? Or put another way, as sharp as you are, that kind of steel-trapped mind you got, it's a bit off-putting to realize, all right, wait a minute, I'm gonna float this. I was just thinking. And by the time you said, I'm going to float what I was just thinking, I mean, what was that, a second? You have to go, damn, I had it. You know, nobody needs a hair shirt. A man attempting to do this, vanity is no problem. A search for some way to humble oneself. That's a laugh. The float would be to take something, and what you're attempting to do, and what you can do. When you do it, you have stopped the horse. It's still there in place, but you have taken something. A question. All right, I'll go ahead and bring in one. Let's say it comes to your attention. Let's say you were at a funeral. Some friend of yours has had a tragedy in the family. It doesn't have to be a funeral. And they are really feeling depressed. And they have been for several days. And they're a friend of yours, and you've seen them several times of late. And perhaps you and some other people are sitting with them having coffee, and somebody finally says, you know, I know it's been a great heartbreak for you what happened, you know, but you've been depressed. It's getting pretty serious. We're worried about you. And the person goes, yeah, I know. And so then somebody goes, that reminds me. And up till then, the few times you've seen them in the preceding several days, everything's been on a pretty subdued basis because of the tragedy. But let's say that someone finally, it just strikes them, enough's enough, and they just suddenly tell this outrageously corny joke. Real loud voice and all kinds of gestures there at the coffee shop. And there sits this person that's still in the throes of this, the aftermath of the calamity. I mean, a real one that no one blames them for is not. And the person goes, they realize it was a joke, and they go, let's say that you're sitting there and you see that, and let's say that you simultaneously recall that you have observed before how easy it is. See, maybe I should do a little bit more. The person that was depressed goes, ha, 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 ha. And the person who told the joke says, see, you can feel better. See, he's laughing. See, he's laughing. And he points, and all the people, including you realize, well, he is. It's the first time in a week, in days, that he's laughing. He goes, ha, 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 ha. And they say, he's laughing. And they punch him on the shoulder and say, now, see, don't you feel better? I mean, I know it was horrible, but come on, see, you can feel better. He goes, ha, 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 ha. It's very quickly back to the state, the sad state. So there you are observing this, and let us say that you have noted in the past that the converse of that does not track. Yeah. For those of you who do not know, it is simplicity itself, and you're welcome to try it, to be in a fairly good mood. Just be in a happy mood. And if you can remember this, tomorrow, if you're just in a happy mood, if you must prove it to yourself, all you've got to do is think about something that was truly a calamity in your life, something that was truly a heartbreak. Actors, it's not important, but actors surely, they do discover this. Nobody makes anything of it, but that is that it is harder to shake apart that's involved with sadness, with negative emotions. That is, to walk off the stage or to get through with a day's filming if you're a movie star and not take it with you, than it is feigning that is playing a happy part. And anybody can try that. You do not certainly have to be a thespian. But all you've got to do is find out. You can be in just a flatline mood, just normal state, or you can be exceptionally happy for some reason. Just you wake up and you're happy, and you're on the way to work. Suddenly think about something that actually broke your heart at one time, and you'll be in that mood. I mean, you'll be in it. And if you don't make any further effort, you're in it for a while. It has become your real emotion. It has become your real sensation of feeling at that time. So let us say that you're sitting there in the coffee shop and you see, and it strikes you, the reality of it. Now I won't keep dragging this out, it's just we'll assume that you've been around this enough and done things on your own that there are many things that suddenly you know. It strikes you and you're aware of the fact that, wait a minute, it is much more difficult, to say the least. There may be no comparison, but it is much more difficult. It is almost a whole other realm. That is the difference between being in a happy mood for no reason, just you're in a happy mood, and to feign, or for someone to get you sad. You're in a happy mood. It's not just you, by the way. I assume you get it. But you could be in a happy mood, sitting somewhere, and somebody come in and sit down, one of your friends or somebody, and look sad, and you start off being happy and order them a cup of coffee, and good to see you and all this, and you suddenly realize they're down the mouth, and you go, is something wrong? And they come out with some, real catastrophe, that some close relative died. And I mean, they're so close to you that suddenly you understand. It's you, well, my God, maybe it's their mother, and you knew the woman, or somebody, their wife, husband. You go, oh, good God, I had no idea. You are sad. In other words, somebody else, not that he intended to, but this other person's retelling of something, their emotion, their words. I say their emotion, their words. He just says, my mother died my mother died night before last, just suddenly. You go, you're kidding. He goes, no. Your mother? Francine or whoever it was? And he says, yeah. You're not happy. It is gone. You are in a state of sadness, just to put simple words. All right, so there you sit in a coffee shop, back to the original story. You understand putting stories within stories, but you can do that. You got brains within brains. Back to my story, you're sitting there and it strikes you without any doubt the fact that one can be in a, just using simple terms, a happy state, and through either faking it or, let's say, through somebody else's, with no conspiratorial, there's no machinations, they have no purpose in mind to get you this way, but somebody else can, what they say, can take you from being happy to being sad. Or if they wanted as a challenge, they could. They could come in and do that. I could tell somebody, go in there, that's so-and-so, I know that guy, sitting right there, go in there and sit down beside him and start moaning or something. No. And I know him, he'll probably friendly, and he'll probably say there's something wrong and say, my mother just died. A stranger could walk in and do that. You understand what I'm trying to get at, because people normally wouldn't do it because it sounds too ill-civil. But somebody could do that and make you sad. But remember where we were, the story that you're sitting there in the coffee shop, and it strikes you, that can happen, and yet it's almost impossible for the reverse to be operational. That is, for you to be sad up to a certain point, to a certain intensity, and somebody be able to get you out of it. Even if they tell you a joke and you go, ha, 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 ha. And there you sit pondering. There's a relative strength between the condition of being happy and sad, or if you really float it and don't jump to one of any binary possibilities, there could be a flaw in the whole idea that everything is reversible, that everything has its opposite. There could be an unknown territory in the human nervous system between thought and emotion that has never been plotted. Because if it is a simple, direct connection between, if we're going up the human nervous system, as I used to draw the nervous system up and using it in a non-sequential, non-spatial, though diagrammed it in such a manner of going up from the body through the emotions to the intellect, or for those few who seem to like the news story, the last program that said the illiterate jazz musicians from New Orleans went up to Chicago to seek their fame and fortune, and there learned to read and write music. Yet some, on the way up the river, did not complete the trip and stopped off in Memphis and learned to play the blues. At least any of you thought that I was simply retelling the so-called history of American jazz. That's the history of man in a musical allegory. But it might strike you, if you had heard all that, if you had experienced what I said, that perhaps the whole idea of there being a simple connection, that is, if I didn't cloud it up already, you understand, to use my descriptions, as crude as they are, but they are not misleading, that apparently a person can be in a happy mood and be made sad easily, almost immediately, by an intellectual input. They can. There you are happy, the phone rings, you pick it up, and the voice says, "Is this Fred Johnson?" You go, "Yeah." And they go, "Your wife was just killed in an automobile accident." It's sound waves going down a line, coming out this little speaker into your ear, going in and wiggling that. Sound waves. The only things that make any abstract sense only to humans. There's no other creature on this planet. There's no creature known to ordinary humans in this universe to which sound waves, that sound has some abstract message. The best that creatures can do that have no intellect, the sound either is irrelevant or represents food. A tiger hears a cow moo, or a cow hears a tiger move in the bushes, and it's danger. But they are not abstract messages. They are absolutely survival messages. But here you sit, you're happy, da-da-da-da-da, pick up the phone. Hello? Your wife just got killed. Sound waves went into your brain, and now you are devastated. Now this is so natural, no one ever thinks about it, but think about it. You are just as happy as you could be. All sorts of things are going your way. You just found out much good news in the mail. You just opened your mail, and just as you're looking at it, the phone rings. Happy you. All sorts of things to be happy about. And you walk over and pick up the phone, still whistling and bouncing, and sound waves come through this little piece of plastic, go into your ear. Sound waves. No. Well, we could put it down, as you know, cycles per second instead of words. We'll make out a graph and plot how the sound came through. But these sound waves, and suddenly, you are devastated. It went in the intellect. But immediately, the speed of sound, you are devastated emotionally. And yet the reverse is not operative. There is nothing similar in the other direction. So the question I was going to give you credit for asking yourself, the kind of thing that I was going to use an example of floating, is you think, wait a minute, there's something peculiar that without any doubt, the opposite will not reverse. You cannot be devastated. You hang up the phone from hearing that, you are devastated. You are as sad as you can be. You're the saddest of your life. You sit there, and sometime later the phone rings, and you pick it up, and somebody says, "You have just won a free trip to Hawaii." That will not change your state, you know that. Much less somebody call up and say, "Hey, you've been chosen to receive the joke of the day free for the next 6 months." You know, and here's today's. There is no kind of sound wave going to come into your ear right then to get into your intellect, into your mind, that will reverse the process. 5 minutes ago you were happy, and the sound came in that said your wife or husband had just been killed in a wreck. You are devastated. 5 minutes after that, nobody can call you up and say you just won a trip. You just won a new car. It will not reverse it. And you go, "Oh!" and then you're happy again. You know that's not true. There is something peculiar. It should strike you. Because in every other area, the mind, if it is strictly, apparently, a mental question, for every truth, there is a falsehood. For every fact, there is an error. In the body, you have the same arrangement. For everything that gives pain, there's something that gives pleasure. For everything that is satisfying, like proper food, for everything that's satisfying, there is something that is impertinent. There is something that is moot, if not dangerous, that you should not be eating. And there is no there is no prejudice one way or the other. That is, the pleasant in some way cannot turn into the unpleasant or the unpleasant into the pleasant. It's only in what appears to be a man's emotions. We are out of tape, but that was the example I was going to use, which I got that out. Next time, I'll use that example. I could use anything, but to tie it to passion and emotion, you go ahead and do it on your own. To be able to float something, it's to think about it, in a sense, with absolutely no prejudice. Nowadays, somebody should slap me for using it, with no agenda. You've got, it's in truth that which would be to consider it in an objective manner. And when I use float, is you could picture it like a hologram, where you can't put your hands on it, and you don't sit it down and go, I'm going to study this. You're attempting to study it, but from every possible angle, literally. And as long as you can do that and keep it floating there and not finally touch it and go, to do that is the same as having the horse quit running. It's still, its feet are still moving and it's in place, but as long as you watch it, it won't go anywhere. And you have something close to a calming of the mind, something resembling the overseeing of attention. And you can do something similar, but actually using the mind, not just to stop thought, but of using the intellect for a purpose that can prove useful to you, only you. But such as considering my question about how can emotions apparently go from being good, from being happy into sad, going through the intellect just like that. And there's nothing at all resembling that possible, going in the other direction of going from being sad to being happy. And there is no immediate answer to that, to the mind. And if you think there is, all you're done is the horse is gone again, and you're distracted looking everywhere but here. And somebody says, are you back at it again? What? Huh? What the hell are you talking about?